I never thought I'd come home to find my own house taken over. When I was deployed overseas with my platoon, I trusted that my home would be safe, that it'd be waiting for me exactly as I left it. But what I found was something straight out of a nightmare. The HOA had rented it out behind my back. No warning, no permission, nothing. Just strangers living in my space, making decisions about my property without a single word to me. It felt like a betrayal, like losing a piece of myself while I was serving my country. The HOA, usually just a background annoyance with rules about lawn heights and mailbox colors, suddenly became something else, an adversary. And my platoon, my brothers and sisters in arms, were right there with me. We were stuck between the military discipline we lived by and the raw frustration of having our friend's home hijacked. How far would we go to get it back? That question was already hanging heavy in the air. This isn't just a story about a home or some bureaucratic mess. It's about trust broken and loyalty tested, about a community that should protect its own but instead turned against one of its members. It's about what happens when rules don't make sense anymore. And when the people who are supposed to have your back turn their backs instead, as we planned how to take back what was ours. Tensions rose. The lines between right and wrong blurred. What started as a fight over a house became something much bigger, a battle for respect, dignity, and justice. But the real question was, how far would we go? And what would happen when we made our move? The answer wasn't clear yet, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. The whole situation started months before I even left for deployment. When I first got orders, I made sure to inform the HOA about my plans to be away for an extended period. I expected the usual paperwork and some rules to follow, but nothing out of the ordinary. I never imagined they'd take such drastic steps without reaching out. It turns out, behind the scenes, the HOA board was dealing with financial issues and decided to rent out vacant homes to cover costs, including mine. That was the first shock. Finding out my house was being treated like some rental property felt wrong on every level. Meanwhile, my platoon and I were deep in training, focused on the mission ahead. We had no idea what was unfolding back home until one of my closest friends, who had been checking on the neighborhood, called me with the news. Hearing that strangers were living in my house while I was risking my life halfway across the world was a punch in the gut. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could the HOA just decide that? Where was any respect for the people who serve? Yet, people living in my home weren't hostile. They were just caught in the middle. But that didn't make things any easier. I started digging, trying to find any legal way to get the situation fixed. But every step led to more roadblocks. The HOA had some legal cover, or at least that's what their lawyers claimed. That's when I realized this wasn't just a simple mix-up. It was a fight that would take everything we had. My platoon, more than just comrades, became family in that moment. They understood the stakes. When I shared the story, they didn't hesitate. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about standing up for what's right. But as we planned, the risks grew, and so did the tension. What would happen? When we took action, the answer wasn't clear, and the stakes were higher than ever. As the days went on, the situation only got more complicated. On one hand, the HOA insisted they had every right to rent out the home, citing vague clauses buried deep in the community's regulations. On the other, I had my deployment orders, my lease agreements, and a sense of duty that made this personal. It wasn't just about me losing my house. It felt like the entire system was stacked against those who serve. Some neighbors whispered their opinions, divided between sympathy and fear of crossing the HOA. The community I once trusted suddenly felt fractured. And uncertain, my platoon and I started to hear stories from others in similar situations. Turns out, my home wasn't the only one affected. Several other deployed service members had faced similar treatment homes rented out or neglected without consent. It opened a whole new layer of frustration. This wasn't just about a single violation. It was part of a larger pattern. Our fight wasn't just personal anymore. It was about standing up against a broken system that failed to protect those who sacrificed the most. Meanwhile, the people living in my house were caught in a tough spot. They had no idea about the HOA's behind-the-scenes deals or the turmoil it was causing. For them, it was just a roof over their heads. I struggled with conflicting feelings, anger at the HOA, but sympathy for those renters. Could I make them understand without escalating things further? How do you reclaim what's yours without turning it into a battle that hurts innocent people? Back with the Platoon, every conversation was filled with tension and unanswered questions. We were strategizing, weighing risks, and preparing for a move that could change everything. But there was no playbook for this kind of fight. What lines could we cross? What consequences were waiting if we pushed too hard? The answers weren't clear, and the weight of responsibility pressed down hard. One thing was certain: whatever happened next, nothing would be the same. The days before we took action felt like walking a tightrope. Every call, every meeting with the HOA felt more like a confrontation than a conversation. They doubled down, sending legal notices and warnings, making it clear they weren't going to back down. Meanwhile, the renters inside the house were growing uneasy to uncertain who had the real claim. Caught between the HOA's authority and my deployment status was a pressure cooker ready to explode. My platoon and I met in secret planning. Carefully, we weren't just fighting for a house anymore. This was about standing up for each other, for the respect that every deployed soldier deserves. We knew the risks: legal trouble, backlash from the community, even potential damage to our reputations, but none of that mattered as much as reclaiming what was ours and sending a message that service shouldn't mean losing everything. At home, every night, I thought about my family, my future, and the sacrifices made, not just by me, but by everyone who supported me while I was away. The injustice stung deeper, knowing the very place I called home was being rented out without my say. We all felt the weight of what was to come. The tension was thick, every moment dragging out the uncertainty. Would the HOA relent? Would the renters leave peacefully? Or would this spiral into something much bigger than any of us expected? The plan was set, but the unknown loomed like a storm on the horizon. No one could say exactly how it would end. Would we be heroes reclaiming what was rightfully ours, or would the fallout be more than we could handle? The line between standing firm and crossing it was razor thin. As the moment to act approached, the air was electric with anticipation, and every second felt heavier. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about justice, loyalty, and the lengths people go to protect what's theirs. Just when we thought we had a clear path forward, something unexpected hit us like a punch to the gut. Late one evening, a call came in from a neighbor, someone we hadn't expected to hear from. They told us that the HOA had secretly filed paperwork claiming ownership rights over my property, trying to legally seize it while I was deployed. It was a move that flipped the entire situation upside down. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the rental anymore. The HOA was trying to take the house away completely. The news spread fast through our platoon and the community. It raised the stakes higher than we'd imagined. Now, what started as a fight to reclaim a rented home had turned into a battle over ownership itself. The HOA's actions felt like a violation not only of my rights but of every deployed service. Members' trust. It was a power play that threatened to leave me homeless and powerless. And the anger and frustration among us grew even more intense. At the same time, tensions with the renters inside escalated. They were nervous, unsure whether to pack up or stand their ground. Some even started questioning if the whole situation was more complicated than they thought. We faced the challenge of balancing our fight against the HOA, while not turning the renters into enemies. They were caught in the crossfire and deserved respect too. As we prepared to make our move, the weight of the HOA's new claim hung over us like a dark cloud. The conflict wasn't just about property anymore. It had become a test of loyalty, justice, and how far we were willing to go for what was right. The tension had never been this thick, and the question lingered. Could we outsmart an organization willing to bend the rules, or was this fight already slipping out of our control? The next steps we took would change everything, but how, we still didn't know. The night we decided to take action, everything was charged with tension. My platoon and I moved carefully, not just as soldiers, but as friends, determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine. We approached the house quietly, aware that every step could change everything. The renters, caught in the middle of this mess, were surprised but didn't resist. They understood the situation once we explained, and some even apologized for the confusion. It wasn't about them, they were just victims of the HOA's reckless decisions. When we finally faced the HOA board the next day, it felt like standing up to a wall of stone. But instead of the confrontation we expected, something surprising happened. The legal documents they had filed to claim ownership, it turned out they were based on a clerical error misfiled deed that belonged to a different property. The HOA had been rushing and cutting corners, and their attempt to take my home collapsed under its own weight. That moment was a relief, but also a powerful reminder of how close we had come to losing everything. The HOA had to back down, and the community began to see the real consequences of their choices. More than the house, we'd fought for respect and for the people who serve, often overlooked. But just when it seemed like the fight was over, another call came in this time, from a fellow soldier deployed in a nearby unit. He told me that a similar HOA scandal was unfolding in his neighborhood. It was bigger than we thought, and our battle was just one part of a much larger story. The fight for justice was far from over. We had won a battle that night. But the war for fairness, respect, and truth was only beginning, and we were ready for whatever came next. After the HOA's mistake came to light, the tension that had been building for weeks finally began to ease. The board members were forced to admit their errors, and the renters agreed to leave peacefully. Understanding the mix-up that had appended everyone's lives, it wasn't perfect. There was still damage to the trust within the community, but it was a start toward healing. I worked closely with neighbors, the renters, and the HOA to rebuild communication and trust. The experience taught me that sometimes systems meant to protect us can fail, especially when corners are cut or people forget the human side of things. It also reminded me how important it is for deployed service members to have strong support. Back home, we risk so much overseas, and it's only fair that our homes remain safe and respected while we're away. My platoon stood by me through it all, showing what true loyalty looks like. We weren't just soldiers on a mission. We were friends fighting for what mattered most: dignity, respect, and a place to call home. That bond helped me get through the toughest moments, and it's something I'll carry with me forever. Looking back, the whole ordeal was a wake-up call for our community. It sparked conversations about how HOAs operate and the rights of homeowners, especially those serving in the military. People started paying more attention, demanding better transparency and fairness. And while the road wasn't easy, I'm proud we stood up and made a difference. In the end, it was never just about a house. It was about standing up when something feels wrong, about fighting for what's right, and about the strength found in brotherhood and community. And no matter where deployment takes me next, I know I'm not alone.